are migraine headaches. 20% of the world does not eat chocolate, and it's not by choice. It's due to the adverse effects of a very strong stimulant in chocolate. It's known as theobromine. Now, theobromine has a lot of pluses and minuses relative to body chemistries. One of the downside effects are headaches. One of the upside effects, theobromine also will incite the libido. It makes you romantically inclined. That's why gentlemen give chocolate to ladies and don't. But there again, there's the headache factor. Now we take the beans and extract by pulling off the fibrous membranes. So it's done one pod at a time throughout the world with your fingers. Now just this past Monday we had thousands of pods here, so we were here for a while. So when you get the beans fully manually extracted from the pod, it exposes what is known as the fibrous membrane. Now this is the fibrous membrane that the beans were attached to for 65 days and turned the pod for ripening on the tree. This is al dente in texture, very citric and sweet, and these are eaten as snacks throughout the equatorial regions throughout the world. In fact, we eat some of these every time we extract the beans. I will probably eat this one after the tour. We sent about 7 pounds of these last year during the chocolate festival at Jackie Lau. Jackie Lau is the chef de cuisine for Roy Yamaguchi. It owns Roy's Restaurants. And for the chocolate festival, she made a sorbet and a cake icing out of these fibrous membrane. We called it a stem cell icing. So they're getting a little more adventurous to make food items out of these rather than just eating them or throwing them away. Alton Brown was here a couple years back, and he's finishing up one of the shows on the Food Channel he was hosting at the time called Good Eats. He dedicated the last show to Good Eats to chocolate. So he traveled out from Atlanta to visit us, and we introduced Alton Brown to these fibrous membrane. He really liked them, but he said they would be even better dipped in chocolate. And we've learned that each cocoa bean, once it's exposed to the environment, has its own autonomous ability to generate its own surface heat. So when we put the beans in these wooden fermenting boxes, we take 5-gallon buckets of wet loose beans, pour them directly into the empty box, and as they begin to accumulate in the box, they will assume a bulk configuration, just like the amount I formed here on the table. Each bean is touching each other. Each bean is generating its own surfaces. So it's kind of like the composting effect. The beans will start sharing the surface heat that they're generating with each other, and within a matter of days, the mass of beans in the fermenting box will elevate in temperature to 122 degrees. Wow. And at that point, the white polymer coatings will clarify to a clear nectar-type liquid, drain off the beans, through the beans, out through the sides of the bottom box and onto the ground. You can see a little puddle of sweat right on the side of that box right there. This is known as sweating the cocoa beans. So when cocoa beans are introduced to the environment, they have the ability to generate their own surface heat and sweat their white coatings off. Now this is where the acetic, lactic, and citric acids are created during the fermenting process, killing the beans and ultimately stimulating the flavor. Fermenting process is a 6-day process. Now once the beans are fully fermented, they're ready to come out of the fermenter and go into the sun. They're plump in moisture, 50% moisture. We have to reduce the moisture content from 50 down to 7. Takes 22 to 28 days in the sun. Now, once the beans have been reduced in moisture content from 50 down to 7 through the exposure of sun, at that point, at 7% or slightly under, we burlap bag and store the cocoa beans. Cocoa beans at 7% or less in moisture can be stored for years. These are the Geico geckos. You see them on TV. They got a British accent, and they sell auto insurance. They're actually just coming out to eat the coating. They like to eat the coating. He'll be back. Now, there are 5 steps to convert a cocoa bean into an edible piece of chocolate. Cleaning, roasting, winnowing, conching, and tempering. Now, cleaning doesn't mean washing the beans. You're removing extraneous matter. It can be organic solid matter. First step, removing the impurities from the cocoa beans. Second step, roasting. That's where we seize and lock the flavor inside the cocoa beans. When the beans come out of the roaster, they're toasty in color, but the rusty colored shell is still intact. The shell is where all the bacteria is and is virtually indigestible. The FDA requires that shell to be cleanly removed. We're now at step 3. The process is known as winnowing the cocoa beans. The winnowing process, we take the fragile, brittle roasted bean shell intact, pass them through a breaker. The breaker breaks the beans into a coatmeal material of shell and nib. The shell is aerodynamic, the nib is heavier, so when the coatmeal material mixed in the breaker drops on a vibrating sieve and begins to take a forward motion. As it's taken its forward motion, we utilize calibrated aspirators or vacuum tubes, if you will, or we vacuum that aerodynamic vertical shell up away from the nib being heavier in substance and context will not lift and drops into a tray. So that's how you get the shell away from cocoa beans. It's called winnowing the cocoa beans. Once we get all the pieces of chocolate nib free of shell, we're ready to make chocolate. We're now at step 4. The procedure we use for making chocolate is known as conching. You'll see the conch when you go to the factory. It's a pivotal piece of equipment. Not only makes the chocolate, but also attains the texture. Takes 18 hours to make the chocolate. Now, we don't make white chocolate because white chocolate is not chocolate. White chocolate is the extruded yellow cocoa butter, sugar, milk, and vanilla. The FDA allows them to call it chocolate because you're eating a component of the cocoa bean. But you're not eating the nib of the chocolate. You're eating a yellow butter that's been squeezed out of the cocoa bean. That cocoa butter and cocoa powder comes from specialized facilities. They're known as expeller facilities. No such facilities of that sort in Hawaii. So we can't make Hawaiian white chocolate even if we wanted to, because we have no way to acquire 100% Hawaiian cocoa butter. We choose to keep it Hawaiian, so we just do the milk and dark Hawaiian chocolates. Once the chocolate is finished in the conch, we temporarily store it. We're now at the final step 5 of doing chocolate. Final step of doing chocolate is known as tempering. Tempering is where we physically move the chocolate very slowly as we cool it very slowly. When chocolate cools, the constituent of cocoa butter likewise cools. When cocoa butter cools, it always forms stable and unstable cocoa butter crystals. For properly tempered chocolate, we have to have all the stable beta-type crystals. The way we attain that is we set the chocolate in motion as we're cooling it. When unstable cocoa butter crystals initially form, as they begin to cool, and they continue to cool very slowly for a period of time, the unstable cocoa butter crystals will eventually realign their molecular configuration from unstable to stable. And at that point in time, you have all stable cocoa butter crystals. That's what gives chocolate a nice satin sheen, a nice snap when you break it, and it also facilitates it coming out of the mold as you put it into. And ladies and gentlemen, we finally have a finished product. From the tree to little bite-sized flowers, we call those our plumerias. Yet those are tasters when you got off the bus in the old monkey pod tree. We also have plumeria nuilos, larger flowers, individually boxed, makes real nice individual gifts. Women bars, pound stuffer, magnum fuss, all kinds of good stuff. We also have a DVD called Chocolate is Aloha. It goes over everything I've discussed today, however, done in much better taste. Has a nice Hawaiian lady's over voice, beautiful slack key guitar music, and beautiful scenery. So when you get back home, you sit down with your friends and acquaintances and say, listen, let me explain to you about the chocolate factory. Rather try to explain it to them, show them. Pictures worth 1,000 words. So if you'd like to get a DVD or chocolate today,